So here is the thing about the ocean. The deeper you go, the weirder things get. Like, we know this now because we have submarines and cameras and people who are way braver than I am, but what's really messed up is this whole deeper equals scarier thing has been true for basically forever. We're talking hundreds of millions of years here. Back when the oceans were full of creatures that made today's sharks look like goldfish, there was this gradient of terror. Shallow water and rivers had some weird stuff, sure, but the deeper you went, the more it felt like evolution was just throwing darts at a board and seeing what stuck. And here's what nobody really talks about. These ancient oceans weren't just deeper and darker, they were older dark. Like, this was darkness that had never seen a human, never seen a mammal even, never seen anything that would make sense to us. So basically, we're about to take a little trip, starting in the shallows where things are almost normal, not really, and ending up in the depths where normal went to die. Let's dive in. So we're starting in the shallow parts, the nice parts, if you can call any of this nice. About 380 million years ago, there were these reefs in what's now Australia. Warm water, lots of coral, it seems fine. And swimming around in there was Materpiscis, which just means mother fish, because scientists aren't always creative with names like I am. I call it mommy fish. Here's what you need to know about Materpiscis. It was about a foot long and had this armored head with big tooth plates for crushing shells. It ate clams and whatever else it could crunch down on, which is normal fish stuff, right? Wrong. Because in 2008, someone found one of these things with a baby inside. And not just a baby, but an actual developed baby with bones connected by what's basically an umbilical cord. This fish was pregnant. Now, that might not sound creepy, but think about it for a second. This is the oldest evidence we have of any animal with a backbone giving live birth. Before this, we thought everything just laid eggs and called it a day. But no, Materpiscis was out here growing whole babies inside its body while swimming around a reef full of things that wanted to eat it. And the baby was huge. It was actually about a quarter of the mom's size. So imagine being pregnant with something that's 25% of your body weight. And you can't exactly take a break because there's armored predators everywhere. Just constantly swimming, constantly looking over your shoulder, constantly grinding up shellfish to feed yourself and this massive baby that you're carrying around. All right, so quick thing before we talk about the next animal, and this is actually kind of disturbing. I was buying some books online about prehistoric creatures the other day, and I found out that there are these fake online stores that look completely legitimate. Like, they've got the professional layout and everything, and the second you pay them, they just delete the website and take your money, which is insane. Give me back my Stegosaurus! So that's why I'm glad to tell you that today's video is partnered with NordVPN, and they've got this thing called Threat Protection Pro that warns you if you're about to enter a fake shop. What it does is that it scans the site before you put in your payment info. In fact, it is so useful that NordVPN actually is among the top of tools for detecting fake shops. Plus, it blocks phishing sites too, which is when someone makes a fake login page that looks real to steal your password. In fact, NordVPN is the only VPN that's officially certified for anti-phishing protection. But honestly, a huge reason I wanted to work with them is way simpler. I've been trying to watch all of the Jurassic Park movies for obvious reasons, and some are just not available in my country right now. With NordVPN, you open the app, connect to a server somewhere else, and then it can show up on your favorite streaming platforms, which takes maybe like 10 seconds. If you want to check it out, the link is nordvpn.com/spinosnack. Right now, when you get the 2-year plan, you can get a bonus 4 months added on top, and you can only get this deal through my link in the description and the pinned comment below. There's also a 30-day money-back guarantee if it's not for you. Again, one more time, my link is nordvpn.com/spinosnack. Thank you so much to NordVPN for being today's video's partner. Now let's talk about more weird creatures. The really messed up part is that this wasn't a fluke. This was their whole strategy: give birth to big developed babies so they'd have a better shot at not dying immediately, which means every adult Materpiscis you saw was basically exhausted 24/7, but at least it had armor and stayed near the reef, because not everything down there had armor or anywhere to hide. It's time to talk about Ctenurella. It's 5 inches long with barely any armor, just a few thin plates covering its head, and that's it. Everything else was exposed. Oh, and it lived deeper than Materpiscis, down where the light starts giving up. You can tell because of the eyes. They were huge, and I don't mean big for its body size, I mean genuinely massive eyes that took up a ridiculous amount of space on its head. That only happens for one reason: you need to see in the dark. So Ctenurella spent its time down at the base of reefs, in the shadows, hunting whatever small things it could catch. It had this long whip-like tail that it used to zip around. It was a fast little thing, and it had to be because everything else else down there was bigger and hungry. And trust me, there was a lot of things down there that were bigger and more hungry. The thing is, when you're 5 inches long and you've got almost no armor, your survival strategy is pretty limited. You can't fight, you can't really hide because you're not that good at it. So you just have to be fast and hope nothing notices you before you notice it. But here is the kicker. Ctenurella also gave live birth. It dropped fully formed babies right there in the dark water because eggs would have been too vulnerable. Those baby Ctenurellas had to start swimming and hunting immediately or they were done. The entire species was just this constant cycle of being born, trying not to get eaten, eating smaller things, maybe getting lucky enough to reproduce, and then probably getting eaten anyway. And all of this was happening in water that was just barely too deep for you to comfortably dive to. We're not even talking about the real deep stuff yet. This was still technically shallow water, though calling Australian swamps shallow water feels pretty generous. So now we're in freshwater. Billabongs, basically, those murky ponds and streams in Australia that look calm but aren't. Gooloogongia lived there about 360 million years ago. It was 3 feet long, which doesn't sound that big until you remember we're talking about a fish in a pond. In a pond, 3 feet is huge. And look, this is a video about the ocean, but I thought we had to include this thing because it is just so scary for being in a pond. But size isn't the scary part about it. The scary part is the teeth, because Gooloogongia had 2 rows of them. The front was all hooks, curved, sharp, and pointing backward. Once something got caught in those, it wasn't getting out. And then behind those, it had these long stabbing fangs. Scientists figured out that these teeth weren't strong enough to bite through armor. They were too thin, they would break. So Gooloogongia only went after soft things. Small fish, early amphibians trying to crawl back into the water, anything squishy it could tear apart. Now here is where it gets weird. We know about Gooloogongia because of a place called Canowindra. It's a fossil site where they found dozens of these fish all piled up together, dead all at once. What happened was this water hole dried up. So picture this, the water is getting lower every day. These fish are crammed into a smaller and smaller space. They're desperate, starving, and probably eating each other. And then eventually the water's just gone and they all die there in the mud. That's how we found them. Just this massive grave of ancient fish with big teeth, all tangled up together. The thing is, Gooloogongia was one of the top predators in these billabongs. It was the thing everything else was afraid of. But when the water disappeared, none of that mattered. At least it stayed in fresh water though, unlike the next creature we're talking about. It's time to go back to the ocean. Actually in lagoons this time, 240 million years ago. There was this thing called Largocephalosaurus. The name means large-headed lizard, which is accurate, but it also undersells how weird it looked. Imagine a barrel. Now put a head on one end, a tail on the other, and stick 4 flippers on the sides. Then cover the whole thing in chunks of bone armor. That was Largocephalosaurus. Just this wide, flat, heavily defended blob paddling around lagoons. The armor wasn't a full shell, it was more just rows of bone plates running down its back and spines. It was enough to make biting it a bad time for whatever tried. But the really strange part was its teeth. They were leaf-shaped, flat, with one side curving out and the other curving in. And those aren't hunting teeth. Those are teeth for eating plants, or maybe soft coral or sponges. Nobody's totally sure, but definitely not for ripping fish apart. So Largocephalosaurus was probably just floating around munching on seaweed or whatever passed for salad back then. It was slow, heavy, and unbothered. And it couldn't breathe right because all of that armor meant its ribs were basically locked in place. Couldn't expand its chest to pull in air, so it had to pump its throat instead. Just sitting there, gulping, trying to get oxygen while being shaped like a boat. The defense strategy was genius though. Be so slow and so armored and so uninteresting that predators didn't even bother. Nothing wants to spend 20 minutes chewing through bone plates for a mouthful of seaweed-eating reptile. There are much easier meals out there. And it worked. Largocephalosaurus survived by being the least appealing target in the lagoon. Not fast, not dangerous, just thick and boring and covered in bones. Though if you think that's over-engineered, the next one went even further. Sinosaurosphargis looked like someone tried to build a turtle from scratch and got confused halfway through. It had thousands of tiny bone plates covering its body. Not a few big ones, but thousands. They formed this almost complete shell over its back, its sides, even down to its flippers even. It was a mosaic of armor that took being defensive to a genuinely unnecessary level. And it wasn't even a turtle. It's not related to turtles at all. It just decided independently that being covered in bone was the move. This thing lived 248 million years ago, right after the end Permian extinction, which killed off like 90% 90% of everything on Earth. So Sinosaurosphargis crawled out of the apocalypse and immediately committed to having the heaviest possible body plan. It couldn't swim well, probably couldn't swim at all really, just walked along the sea floor with its stubbly little legs, scraping up algae or soft bottom dwelling stuff. The whole shell situation made it too heavy and rigid for actual swimming. Oh, and its ribs were fused together completely. They touched edge to edge and formed this locked cage around its insides, which means again, this dinosaur couldn't breathe normally too. It had to use its throat muscles to pull air in, so it probably sat there gasping between bits of algae. The whole design screams, I survived the worst extinction event in Earth's history, and my response is to never be vulnerable again, just like me after my last breakup, because that's what the armor was for. After the Permian extinction, the ocean was full of new predators figuring out the food chain. Sinosaurosphargis just opted out, covered itself in bone, and became the equivalent of that one house that's too much work to break into. And somehow, it worked. While other reptiles were evolving to be faster or stronger or smarter, Sinosaurosphargis went full tank mode and called it a day. But meanwhile, some things went the opposite direction entirely. 4 millimeters long, smaller than a grain of rice, basically invisible. But Cambropachycope had one feature that makes absolutely no sense for something that size. It had one giant eye, just one right in the middle of its face, and that eye had 150 individual lenses built into it. So this thing that you could barely see had better vision than most animals alive, better than you definitely, and it used that vision to hunt. Yeah, you heard that right, it hunted. It was a predator. This microscopic dot swimming around 497 million years ago was a predator. It hunted things even smaller than itself, which I didn't know was possible, but apparently the Cambrian Ocean had multiple tiers of too small to matter. The eye itself was wild. It had 3 layers, including this dark middle layer that scientists think worked as a light filter, either to cut down on glare from the sun in shallow water or to help it see better in murky water, or both. Nobody really knows because it's hard to figure out what a 500 million-year-old pinhead-sized animal was doing with its alone time. The fact that this level of eye development existed before fish had jaws even is insane. Before bones were a widespread thing, before most animals figured out how to not be shaped like a pancake, Cambropachycope already had a complex, multi-layered eyeball with filtering capabilities. It had 3 pairs of legs on its head and more on its body, and swam around in open water hunting microscopic prey with the confidence of something much larger. The ocean was full of giants and monsters and armored nightmares. And then there was this. A speck with an eyeball, doing predator things on a scale that barely qualified as visible. But of course, eventually we're going to need to talk about things that weren't microscopic, because that's what I promised you. Well, let's now do that. How about 10 feet of armored fish with jaws that worked as scissors? And no, this isn't Dunkleosteus. This was Eastmanosteus. The head was covered in bone plates. The jaws had these blade-like edges instead of teeth, and they sharpened themselves. Every time Eastmanosteus bit down on something, the top blade scraped against the bottom blade, keeping both sides razor sharp. So it could just slice through whatever it wanted. Flesh, bone, other fish's armor, it didn't matter. This thing lived 380 million years ago, and fossils have been found on basically every continent. Europe, Australia, North America, Asia, it was everywhere. And in places where Dunkleosteus wasn't around. Eastmanosteus was the biggest problem you could run into. Now, here's where it gets uncomfortable. Some Eastmanosteus fossils are so well preserved that scientists can see soft tissue. Not just bones, but actual muscle fibers, blood vessels, nerve structures, all of it is still there, just fossilized, which means we know exactly how this thing killed prey. We can see the muscle attachments, calculate the bite force, and figure out the angle its jaw moved. There's no guessing needed. And what they found is that the jaw was designed for slicing, not crushing. Clean cuts, that is. Eastmanosteus would bite something and just remove a chunk of it, then bite again and then again until the prey either bled out or stopped moving. The fossils show us that it had the jaw strength to cut through bone and the speed to catch fish that were trying to run. So nothing was too fast and nothing was too tough. If Eastmanosteus decided you were food, that was the end of the conversation. In areas where Dunkleosteus also lived, Eastmanosteus had to be careful because Dunkleosteus was twice its size and would absolutely eat it given the chance. But in shallower reefs where the giants couldn't fit, Eastmanosteus ran the show. But at least Eastmanosteus stayed in the water where it made sense. Because you might not know this, but crocodiles used to live in the ocean. Not near it, but in it. Geosaurus was 10 feet long, had flippers instead of legs, it had a tail fin for swimming, and never touched land. Not once. Its entire life happened in open water, yet it was still a crocodile. It had no armor either. Armor is too heavy if you're trying to swim all day, so it had smooth skin, a streamlined body, and a mouth full of serrated teeth that could cut through meat. The teeth were the scary part. It had a short snout, but big teeth with these little saw edges on them. They were built for taking down other marine reptiles and large fish. Geosaurus wasn't chasing small stuff. It went after things that fought back. But the really bizarre detail is that it had salt glands in its skull, which are special organs that let it drink seawater without dying. Most animals cannot do that. You can't do that, but Geosaurus could just gulp down ocean water and filter the salt out, which means that it was likely fully marine. It gave birth in the water because it had no reason to come to shore. Baby Geosaurus just got dropped into the ocean and had to figure it out. This was 150 million years ago, before whales existed, before dolphins. The ocean had fully aquatic crocodiles before it had any of the marine mammals that we think of as normal, and they were successful. Geosaurus had to avoid pliosaurs, which were bigger and could eat it, but other than that, it was near the top of the food chain. It hunted in shallower water and reefs where the giants couldn't follow, and it took whatever it could catch. The whole thing is just strange. Crocodiles in the ocean, swimming with tail fins, drinking salt water, and giving birth to live babies. None of it sounds right, but it all happened. But now let's talk about an even scarier creature. Yunguisaurus was stuck. It was 12 feet long with 4 flippers and a long neck. It was an early version of what would eventually become Plesiosuchus, and it lived 240 million years ago in Chinese seas. The problem was that it still had some leftover bones from when its ancestors lived on land, little remnants in its skeleton that served no purpose anymore. But its body was fully adapted for swimming, because it had flippers instead of legs, with a streamlined build. Everything about it screamed ocean animal. So Yunguisaurus couldn't go back to land even if it wanted to. Those flippers weren't walking on anything. It was locked into the ocean. Born there, lived there, died there. No choice in the matter. Probably gave birth to live babies because what else is it going to do? Can't lay eggs on a beach if you can't get to the beach. The long neck would have been for hunting, to sneak up on fish without them noticing your body, and then snap forward and grab them. It's a pretty effective strategy that Plesiosaurus would use for the next 150 million years. But here's the thing about Yunguisaurus. It was big for its time. It was one of the largest predators around, but that's not because it was especially impressive. It's because everything else was still dead. The Triassic period happened right after the end Permian extinction, the worst extinction event in Earth's history, which killed 90% of all species. So the ocean was basically empty and slowly refilling with whatever could survive. Yunguisaurus was big by default. It won the prize because most of the competition was dead. It was just swimming around in half-empty seas, eating the limited fish available and never being able to leave. It was trapped in the ocean and bigger than everything else, only because everything else was gone. Though being stuck in the water was nothing compared to how some creatures' jaws evolved. Because there was a fish in Canada 350 million years ago with a jaw that was almost 3 feet long. The whole fish was only 10 to 13 feet total, so a significant portion of its body length was just jaw, and that jaw curved, and not just a little bit. In fact, it was shaped wrong. It bent in this arc that doesn't make sense when you look at it. The front of the jaw had hooks, which were curved teeth pointing backward. Then further back in the mouth, it had these massive stabbing fangs. The biggest, strongest teeth were at the back, not the front, which is the opposite of what most fish do. Scientists think the hooks grabbed prey and held it while the back teeth punched through. So Sphyragnatus could actually process what it ate instead of just swallowing things whole. It was the earliest fish we know of that did this. But here's what makes it worse. The fossil comes from a site where researchers described the water is thick with rival fish, including giants several times its size. So Sphyragnatus was big, but not the biggest. It had to hunt while avoiding becoming food itself. Those back fangs could punch through tough skin and scales, which means it probably went after medium-sized fish or early amphibians trying to get back in the water. The whole time it was doing this, there's things in the water that are way bigger and would eat it without thinking twice. The curved jaw is still weird though. Nobody's completely sure why it bent it that way. Maybe it helped with hooking prey. Maybe it was just how the bones grew and worked well enough that evolution kept it. Either way, Sphyragnatus had this scythe-shaped mouth and used it to hunt in waters full of things that could easily kill it. It was just constant risk. Every meal could be your last if something bigger showed up. But weird jaws are nothing compared to weird legs on aquatic creatures. 110 pairs of legs. I need you to sit with that number for a second. 110 pairs. That's 220 individual legs on one animal. Balhuthicaris was about 10 inches long and lived 506 million years ago in the Cambrian Ocean. It had this shell covering its front half that looked like a helmet with flaps hanging down. And then behind that shell was just segment after segment after segment of body, each with its own pair of legs. It had more legs than any other Cambrian animal we've ever found. More legs than made any sense even. And here's where it gets stupid. Nobody knows what it ate. It had no big claws, no obvious weapons, no sharp grabbing arms, nothing that screams predator, so scientists started ruling things out. It was not a hunter, probably not a scavenger, it doesn't have the right mouth parts for filter feeding. The best guess? It swam around sucking in tiny plankton, maybe while upside down, just cruising through the water flipped over, vacuuming up microscopic food with 110 pairs of legs paddling away. The only things that could eat it were radiodonts, which were the apex predators back then, and Balhuthicaris survived by being too big for everything else and too weird for anything to know what to do with it. It wasn't fast, it wasn't dangerous, it was just this long armored multi-legged thing swimming through ancient oceans being really strange. And it worked. Balhuthicaris existed, reproduced, and had a whole population of these things just living their lives with more legs than any reasonable animal needs. The Cambrian Ocean was full of experiments. Evolution was throwing everything at the wall to see what stuck, and somehow 110 pairs of legs stuck. Though that many legs weren't even the strangest thing from that time, because Hurdia had a three-pronged spear sticking out of its face. Well, not technically a spear, but a head shield made of 3 pieces, one in the middle pointing forward and 2 on the sides. The whole thing projected out in front of its head like it was wearing medieval armor, and nobody really knows why. Some scientists think it used the shield to dig through sediment on the sea floor, scoop up mud, and flush out anything hiding in it. Others think it was for ramming other Hurdias during fights, or maybe just for looking terrifying. These are all valid theories. Behind that shield, Hurdia had spiky arms for grabbing prey, and could trap things between the spines and drag them toward its mouth. That mouth was circular with tooth plates for grinding, so once something got caught, it wasn't leaving. This thing was 2 feet long and was an apex predator 505 million years ago, before fish with jaws even existed, before bones were common. Hurdia was out here dominating. It had eyes on stalks that poked up through slots in the head shield, so it could see while keeping the rest of its head protected. Good vision too, because it needed to hunt in water that didn't have great visibility. Hurdia swam using these broad flaps along the sides of its body. Probably not super fast, but fast enough to catch trilobites and other slow bottom feeders. What makes Hurdia unsettling isn't that it was big or dangerous, it's that it was successful. This design worked. The helmet head, the grabbing arms, the weird body. It all functioned well enough that Hurdia became a top predator in Cambrian seas. Evolution had barely started figuring out body plans and already had produced this, a swimming nightmare with a medieval helmet that ate other animals for 500 million years. But then the Cambrian ended and things somehow got worse instead of better. And by worse, I mean 20 feet of crocodile that never saw land. Plesiosuchus lived 155 million years ago in the late Jurassic seas. It is the biggest marine crocodile ever found, and when I say marine, I mean it had flippers, a tail fin, and smooth skin. The whole crocodile design got reworked for deep water. The teeth were the main feature. They were big, thick, with serrated edges running down both sides. It was not for holding prey, but for cutting it. Most ocean predators back then either crushed things or swallowed them whole. Plesiosuchus sliced. Those serrated teeth worked through flesh and bone. It could take chunks out of whatever it caught. Scientists looked at the teeth and said it had killer whale behavior, which is a polite way of saying it ate basically everything and was likely a hom and likely was a psychopath. First, smaller marine reptiles, probably other crocodiles even if it got the chance. Anything that fit in its mouth was on the menu. But Plesiosuchus wasn't alone in the ocean. Pliosaurs were around, which were much bigger marine reptiles with even nastier bites. And that created a problem because Plesiosuchus and Pliosaurs ate similar things. So they divided up the hunting grounds. Plesiosuchus stuck to shallower areas, reefs, and places where the giant Pliosaurs couldn't maneuver as well. It took what it could get and avoided direct confrontation with anything twice its size. The whole late Jurassic Ocean was just multiple giant predators trying very hard not to run into each other while competing for the same food. Plesiosuchus carved out a niche by hunting where the bigger guys couldn't follow, and it worked for millions of years, just swimming around, slicing things up, staying out of the way of the true monsters, which is a survival strategy that requires a decent amount of self-awareness. Know what you can fight, know what you can't, run from the second category. But pliosaurs didn't have anything they needed to run from, because as I mentioned, they were getting stupid big. Lorrainosaurus was 20 feet long with a skull that took up 4 feet of that, jaws full of thick pointed teeth, and each tooth was built for maximum damage. And the bite force behind those teeth could break through bone and armor without slowing down. This thing showed up 170 million years ago in the Middle Jurassic, before all of the famous pliosaurs you've maybe heard of, before Liopleurodon, before any of the truly massive ones. Lorrainosaurus was the start, the first in a line of ocean predators that would dominate for the next 100 million years. What makes it worse is that we have found fossils that preserved soft tissue, which were muscle fibers, blood vessels, and nerves. So we don't have to guess how it killed things. We can see the muscle attachments and work backward to figure out exactly how strong the bite was and how fast it can move. And what the fossils show is that Lorrainosaurus could ambush prey at high speeds and deliver a bite that would kill most things instantly. It had too much force and too much teeth. It ate large fish, squid, other marine reptiles, basically anything swimming in Middle Jurassic seas. And if something was too big to kill in one bite, Lorrainosaurus would just bite it multiple times until the job was done. There wasn't anything in its environment that could fight back effectively. Maybe another Lorrainosaurus, but that's really it. So after millions of years of marine reptiles being mid-sized and reasonable, Lorrainosaurus showed up and proved that you could just be massive instead. Have a huge skull, huge jaws, and huge teeth, and be able to overpower everything. And evolution looked at that strategy and said, yeah, let's keep doing this, and made even bigger pliosaurs for the next 100 million years. Though the absolute biggest fish from this era wasn't even a predator. In fact, it wasn't hunting at all. It was 23 feet long with an armored head and massive jaws. It was actually related to Yunguisaurus, one of the scariest predators that has ever existed on Earth. And yet Titanichtys couldn't hurt you if it tried, because the jaws were built wrong. They were long and thin and weak. It couldn't bite through anything, couldn't even bite down hard enough to crack a shell. So what was a 23-foot armored fish doing in the Devonian Ocean 375 million years ago? Filter feeding. It was just swimming around with its mouth open, straining tiny plankton out of the water, eating things you couldn't see without a microscope. It was the first big vertebrate to figure out that you don't need to hunt if there's enough small stuff floating around. Titanichtys was shaped like Yunguisaurus. It had the armored head, the imposing size, the general appearance of something that you should avoid, but mechanically the jaws could barely function as a weapon. All the studies we've done have shown that it was built for gulping water, not biting prey. So it cruised through deep Devonian seas, probably moving slowly, just filtering out plankton and small animals. Didn't chase anything. Didn't fight anything, it just ate microscopic food in massive quantities. The only real threat was Yunguisaurus itself, which could absolutely bite through Titanichtys' armor if it wanted to. But attacking something that big probably wasn't worth the effort unless Yunguisaurus was desperate. So Titanichtys survived by being too big for most predators to bother with and by eating food that didn't require teeth. It was the ocean's first gentle giant. Huge, weird, and completely harmless. And that worked. In an ocean full of predators with blade jaws and crushing bites, Titanichtys just opted out of the violence, grew massive and filtered plankton, and swam in the deepest, darkest parts of the ocean where nobody could see how strange it was. It was successfully weird for millions of years. If you enjoyed watching this video, make sure to give it a like and comment down below which of the creatures today that you learned about was your favorite. Mine personally probably is Titanichtys. It's pretty damn cool. If you don't want to miss any of our future uploads, make sure to hit the subscribe button and hit the hype button to make sure this video gets seen by more people. And if you want to watch another one of my videos, you can click the video on screen now.